Good afternoon, everybody. I figured we get started a little early here. Just make sure everything's working. All right, we're good to go. So, guys, we have a lot to talk about today. We're going to hop right over to the convective outlooks, and we have a large enhanced risk of severe weather across a large portion of eastern Texas, stretching into southeastern Oklahoma, southwestern Arkansas, and northwestern Louisiana for tomorrow afternoon into the evening and overnight period. We are expecting to see some prefrontal supercells, prefrontal tornadic supercells out ahead of a cold front. That's going to be around likely the 3 p.m. hour or so tomorrow afternoon, and those initial storms could have the potential to produce several tornadoes. One or two of those could possibly be significant. Strong to violent tornadoes a possibility tomorrow, as you guys will see in just a little bit. But there are some concerns in terms of how this overall scenario will evolve. What could happen is we could see these storms initially being semi-discrete supercells with tornado potential, and then they could grow up scale into clusters and lines of storms, which should hopefully limit the overall severity that this event could have. But we are looking at the potential for a significant severe weather outbreak with tornadoes and possibly even an outbreak of tornadoes. Here's a tornado outlook. It has been expanded since this morning's regular forecast video. A large 10% hatch region is up across eastern Texas into parts of Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana as well. It looks like areas east of DFW are going to have the highest chances, the highest end parameter space for significant tornadoes. EF2 plus tornadoes are going to be a possibility here, a very legitimate one. Hail is also possible, but the other main threat associated with tornadoes is also going to be straight-line damaging winds with a broad 30% region up. And a lot of that is likely going to be either from when these clusters of supercells evolve later in the afternoon, and then eventually potentially another round of storms along the actual cold front that can bring yet another round of damaging winds and isolated tornadoes. So let's hop over to the NAM model here. I want to show you guys exactly what the trough is looking like here according to the 18Z NAM. We have had a little bit of changes here and there. So as we get into late tonight, we're going to be seeing really positively to neutrally tilted trough down there into Arizona near the northwestern Mexico border here. And you will notice that this trough becomes a little bit more neutrally to eventually even negatively tilted as we get into tomorrow afternoon, likely reaching down near the Lubbock, Texas area as we get to about the 4 p.m. hour tomorrow. At that point, we're already going to be seeing some bands of supercells developing across northeastern Texas and southeastern Oklahoma, and the trough is going to become negatively tilted at the same time. And then eventually, as we get later into the overnight tomorrow and eventually Saturday morning, the trough goes from negatively tilted to neutrally tilted before ejecting off northward into the northern Mississippi Valley. And that's when the big low-level jet is going to cross into the midwestern Great Lakes, which could bring the potential for isolated severe thunderstorms and also some damaging winds across those areas as well. But we're primarily going to be focusing on the tornado threat across Texas and the Arklatex region for tomorrow. So let's zoom in a little bit closer to the southern plains. And we're going to take a look at the HRRR model first because we do have a new 18Z run-up for this model. So we'll go over to composite reflectivity. And what would be a good hour to start with here? Let's start off with hour 26. So this is by 4 p.m. tomorrow. And according to the 18Z HRRR, look at all of these supercells that we are going to have across eastern, especially northeastern Texas near the DFW area, stretching all the way into Oklahoma and Kansas here. Just numerous bands of supercell thunderstorms. But again, there are some limiting factors here. We're going to talk about all that right now. So first and foremost, here's our moisture. They're going to have southerly to near southeasterly surface winds associated with a warm advection here of 70s dew points across eastern Texas, southwestern Louisiana. We have a ton of available moisture here, streaming well into the upper 60s and low to mid 70s. That combined with the southeasterly surface winds is going to be some very favorable surface ingredients for tornadic supercells. And on top of that, the warm sector is pretty much untouched by a cap, which means that because the cap is so limited tomorrow, we're going to see a ton of storms developing, but it also could be actually a limiting factor to the amount of discrete supercells that we are seeing. We're going to talk about the reasoning for that in just a minute. But again, we have some strong moisture advection by the mid to late afternoon period tomorrow. And the 18ZHRRR is also showing advection of CAPE values possibly well in excess of 2,000 here. So some very high instability. We expect some very high EHI values across parts of eastern Texas to southeastern Oklahoma, because not only is the CAPE super high, again, this is just surface-based CAPE, but we also have very strong low-level jet as well. Look at this. We have a near 50-knot low-level jet across parts of northeastern Texas. These are near due southerly low-level winds here, switching a little bit more southwesterly as you get further west along the cold front, which would be situated near the Oklahoma City area at this time, and it's crashing down to the southeast at that point. Now, again, all the storms, we'll go back to it, are going to be located right over the heart of that warm sector and the low-level jet across northeastern Texas. And because of this, the overall parameter space is going to be very favorable for tornadoes and potentially strong tornadoes as well. But there's two major limiting factors to the overall discrete supercell potential tomorrow. Number one, we have virtually no cap across northeastern Texas. So that means that we're going to be seeing a lot of storms developing in the open warm sector, but it also means that we're probably going to see too many of them. If you see too many storms developing, what happens is the storms will crowd together, they'll congeal together, they'll grow into upscale clusters, and then you're pretty much just looking at numerous, bands of supercells, which could still, of course, be severe, and you could have some spin-up tornadoes. However, the storms that are more discrete and more separated and off on their own are going to have a better potential to produce strong tornadoes than the ones that are all clustered together. So it looks like the low cap is going to have a limiting factor on how discrete these storms will be. On top of that, if we go over to our deep layer bulk shear, our bulk shear is going to be very strong, but also pretty much parallel to the cold front. Remember, the cold front is right along here, kind of right where we go from pink to red across central Oklahoma. That right there is the cold front, and most of these deep layer winds are coming out of the southwest. That is pretty much parallel to the actual cold front that is located over central Oklahoma at this time. So virtually no cap over the warm sector, and deep layer winds that are going to be parallel to the cold front are going to likely make these storms cluster together pretty quickly, which would actually be really a good thing if we saw that, because it means that, the significant tornado threat and just the overall severity of what could be a tornado outbreak tomorrow is likely going to be dimmed down a little bit. We do expect that to be the case, because you will notice that as we go back over to our actual storms here on composite reflectivity, we'll take this every hour along. This is just 2 hours later, and look at how clustered these storms are already together as we get towards the 6 p.m. hour tomorrow. This is east of DFW into eastern Texas, crossing into the Texarkana region here. It only took a couple of hours for these storms to go from semi-discrete to even discrete tornadic supercells to fully upscale. But even these storms are not quite along the cold front just yet. I'm going to go over to forecast loops so that you guys can see when the cold front comes into play. And that is going to be right around here. Right around here. So as we take this back, you can notice this little line of showers and storms developing behind the initial line in south central Oklahoma. This wouldn't be until the 7 or 8 p.m. hour here, but at that time, that's where the actual cold front is. This huge band of storms here in eastern Oklahoma and northeastern Texas, which was initially the discrete supercells, this is out in the open warm sector still. This is ahead of the dry line. This is ahead of the actual cold front, and the cold front storms are likely not going to be as intense. Now, this model here, the 18ZHRRR, is showing them developing pretty significantly as we get towards the 9 p.m. hour across east central Texas. And these could have isolated spin-up tornadoes because it is still some pretty strong wind shear. However, the overall severity of the line on the cold front is likely not going to be as intense as the open warm sector storms, which is actually a little bit concerning to me because, again, even if it's just an initial couple of hours of semi-discrete to discrete supercells as being depicted by the HRRR here, that could still lead to some significant problems during probably the 3 to 6 p.m. time frame tomorrow. So if you do live in northeastern Texas and southeastern Oklahoma, you're definitely going to want to watch this carefully. And if you are chasing this event tomorrow, know that you're probably only going to have a pretty short window in terms of how long these storms are going to stay discrete, because it's not going to be for a very long period of time. Now, I am going to pull some soundings here by 21Z tomorrow so that you guys can see what this is looking like. Let's go right out ahead of that little supercell there in northeastern Texas. Let's try to pull a non-contaminated sounding. Sometimes that can be a little bit difficult with the HRRR. All right, so here's a sounding right out ahead of one of those supercells in northeastern Texas. And look at this, dew point streaming into the low 70s. Actual air temperatures are going to be in the mid 70s, so you have virtually no separation here. The LCLs are going to be very low. Cloud bases are going to be low. You have some thick cape here. Notice that big separation between the temperature and the lapse rate line. That is allowing some strong instability to build up. We have some pretty steep lapse rates across eastern Texas. Surface-based cape is going to be in excess of 2,000. We have southeasterly surface winds as we go over to our hodograph over here. You have your 0 right here. This is what your surface winds are, actually. And you're looking at southeasterly surface winds near 20 knots. You have your 1 up here. That's 1 kilometer above the ground. So if you draw a line, you got your near due southerly to south-southwesterly low-level jet right there. Strong low-level jet, nearly 50 knots. And then your deep layer winds are going to be veering a bit more westerly as you get higher up in the atmosphere. Nice elongated curved hodograph right there, supportive of tornadoes. This is a PDS tornado sounding right here, which means that the conditions are even more ripe for tornadoes than we would be looking at with just an average tornado sounding. That is a strong, significant hodograph right there. We also have some pretty favorable thermodynamics over here on the skew T chart. You got a little bit of an elevated mix layer as you get above 3 kilometers above the ground, about 3 to 9 kilometers. And what that is doing is it is allowing a dry slot of air to steepen those lapse rates above 3 kilometers, which is only allowing the environment to get even more unstable. Barely any capping inversion. You got a steady decrease of temperature with height as you get further up there into the atmosphere, and this really is a favorable sounding for significant tornadoes tomorrow. I am very concerned about tomorrow's tornado potential. Let's go ahead and just pull a box sounding here from all of this action by 21Z tomorrow. It is pretty contaminated. I don't like that sounding. We'll go out a little bit more ahead of it here. But wow, guys. These are some favorable hodographs right here. The skew T's are pretty complex as well. Dew points well into the upper 60s to low 70s here. Lots of instability, very favorable wind shear. But again, the only thing about the wind shear that's going to be unfavorable is the fact that the bulk shear is pretty much parallel to the cold front. And again, what that could do is it could make these discrete supercells by about 3 or 4 p.m. quickly grow upscale. And again, that is going to be probably a limiting factor to how severe this tornado event could get, which is, of course, a good thing. We want to see as little tornado activity tomorrow as possible. But I really think that as of right now, this is going to be an event where we see several tornadoes, and some of those could definitely be on the high end of the spectrum. That was the 18Z HRRR. Let's go ahead and take a look at the 3 kilometer NAM for 18Z, because I expect this one to be different. You guys can already see it is. Let's go over to forecast loop. I am not a huge NAM model fan. I am aware of its linear bias along the cold front, but we are going to just kind of see what it's showing. Wow, look at that. Wow, significant differences between the 18Z HRRR and the 18Z NAM. Pretty much no prefrontal discrete convection here. It's pretty much just all a line of storms along the cold front. Look at that. Even as we get towards the 9 or 10 p.m. hours, it's an organized line, more organized, especially along the cold front, than the HRRR is showing. But that's a lot different, guys. This would probably be less of a tornado threat. You could still see embedded tornadoes, but it would be more of a damaging wind threat along the actual cold front. So let's go backtrack it a few hours here. This is by 4 p.m., according to the NAM. Now, I will note that even though the discrete supercell potential on the NAM is less than the HRRR, your winds at the ground level are going to be a little bit more favorable, looks like. More southeasterly surface winds. You got a little bit of a dry line here, not a super clean dry line as you get into central Texas, but out ahead of it, you are going to have dew points streaming well into the 70s here. Look at all this, 74, 73. Very rich dew points, southeasterly surface winds. We know that the Cape's already going to be high across that area. Cold front is kind of right along that region. So I want to see what the bulk shear is looking like here. But in this case, I really don't think it's even going to matter too much because the NAM is completely linear for tomorrow's setup. Look at that bulk shear. It's pretty parallel to the actual cold front. This is a significant difference to the HRRR. Now, the low-level jet's actually a little bit stronger on the NAM than the HRRR. Look at that. 55-knot low-level jet, especially as you get near DFW northward into eastern Oklahoma. But again, this is all along the cold front. If everything is along the cold front tomorrow, that is going to temper the tornado threat quite significantly. That will probably lead to a more of a damaging wind type scenario, which of course can still cause problems. But hopefully this should limit the tornado threat to some degree if the NAM does verify, because that is just an astounding difference right there, as you guys can see. And even as we head into about the midnight time period, these storms are going to be approaching the Little Rock, Arkansas area, near Shreveport, Louisiana. These storms can still be severe, but it'll probably be more of a wind damage threat at that point. So that was the 18Z NAM, and I'll just show you guys again for another comparison. Let's go back to the HRRR. I mean, wildly different. Absolutely wildly different. I'm actually quite shocked by how much model discrepancy there is right here. The HRRR shows a scenario much more supportive of strong tornadoes because it shows a lot of open warm sector activity. Even if it's just an hour or two of semi-discrete supercells, it's still a pretty significant solution. Whereas the NAM, and by the way, to the HRRR, doesn't really show much happening along the cold front until we get towards the 8 or 9 p.m. hour. And then we have a little bit of a squall line that kind of fades away pretty quickly once we get beyond 10 p.m. or midnight. That's the cold front. And the NAM is much stronger along the cold front, but doesn't initiate hardly any warm sector convection, which is certainly going to make things interesting tomorrow. I am definitely curious to see how tomorrow pans out, guys. We're going to wrap up the live stream here in just a second. But again, for those of you that are just joining, this is tomorrow's severe weather outlook. We have a large enhanced risk of severe weather. This is bigger than it was this morning when I made my video. Level 3 out of 5 there. We have a large 10% hatched area here across the Arklatex into eastern Texas. It's going to be areas east of DFW that have the highest potential for strong tornadoes. Damaging winds also a pretty high threat, and then large hail could be on the table as well. And actually, as we head into Saturday, the only areas that are expected to see any thunderstorm activity, it's going to be the Gulf northward into the Tennessee Valley and lower Ohio Valley. We don't expect much activity in the Great Lakes, but I do think really that any thunderstorm activity across the Great Lakes, we're going to have to watch carefully because we are going to be looking at a very strong low-level jet. But the primary thing that the strong low-level jet is going to do across the Great Lakes on Saturday is going to be creating some strong wind gusts. 40 to 60 mile-an-hour winds are going to be possible across the Midwest. This is definitely something to watch, guys. We also have a small threat of severe weather late tonight as well. Slight risk of severe storms from the panhandles all the way into central Kansas here. I'm not going to get too in-depth with this one. This is a lot less of a severe weather threat, but wind and hail will be a possibility. An isolated tornado cannot be ruled out from the Texas Panhandle into southern Kansas here, but the threat of that is very low, definitely much lower than it is going to be in the afternoon and evening tomorrow. So what are the big takeaways as of now? If you are a fan of the HRRR, you can expect a couple of hours of semi-discrete supercells in northeastern Texas, probably east of Dallas, but in the Dallas vicinity. Those storms could be tornadic. They could be significantly tornadic, and we could be looking at a large handful of tornadoes prior to the actual cold front, and then we could see another bimodal round of storms moving in after we get beyond the 8 p.m. hour. If you are a fan of the NAM, we're probably not going to see barely any open warm sector convection in the afternoon or early evening, and it's pretty much all going to be activity along the cold front, which would be a progressive squall line with damaging winds and isolated embedded tornadoes. That's what I am expecting tomorrow, and I'm definitely not ruling out the possibility that this could be a tornado outbreak, especially if the HRRR does verify. Guys, that is going to wrap it up for the stream. If you did enjoy it, please consider subscribing to the channel with those notifications turned on. But until the next video or live stream, stay safe. I will talk to you guys back here next time, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.